You're listening to Kate Palmer from sparkletart.com, and today I'm going to create a Christmas poinsettia card using Lindy's Stamp Gang products. Now this one is a low stress project. Christmas is often a crazy time and I like to keep my projects and cards relatively simple because you don't really need to add to the stress. So this one is just super simple. On a piece of smooth cardstock, I'm painting, just slapping it on, Cafe au Lait Flat Fabio. Now I'm using a colour shot, but you can also dip the brush after shaking the bottle, and you can dip the brush direct into your bottle if you've just got the spray. I've also got a little watercolour tag, and it's rough watercolour paper, not smooth. I'm painting the Cafe au Lait on here as well. I'm adding a second coat onto the smooth cardstock, and then I'm just going to let this dry. It's going to have a few patterns and imperfections, but that's just going to add to it. Now while that's happening, I have Queen of Hearts Red Flat Fabio and Poinsettia Red Gold in the Starburst. So I'm going to coat a piece of smooth cardstock, nothing fancy, with the Queen of Hearts Red. I'm then going to add the Poinsettia Red Gold. Now I have the little dauber cap on my bottle. If you've got the spray, you can just spray it on, that's fine. I've sort of randomly added splotches, and I'm just spraying it with a little bit of water to make it a bit more fluid so I can move it around a bit. You can see the shimmer here, it's gorgeous. And all I'm doing is tilting it to get a little bit of run on the shimmer so I don't end up with spots. I've left these to dry overnight just to make sure. And I now have some really interesting backgrounds. So you can see that the Cafe au Lait on the watercolor cardstock looks a little bit different and more patterned than it does on the smooth card. And this is great. It gives you a couple of different sort of varieties of background, add a bit of interest. Now, this background is completely stunning. I have no idea why I have some of those darker patches in there, but I love the fact that there's sort of a random quality and you never know quite what you're going to get. Now, if you wanted a smoother background, one without the variation and the little imperfections, you would spritz the cardstock with water first, and this allows the colour to blend and take in a more smooth manner, so you get a more uniform colour. But for me, I love all these little extra bits and dark colours, light colours, a little bit of variation. I think it makes a project a bit more interesting, so I'm going to keep it. Now I have my background pieces and I have the red elements for my central card. I've trimmed my single background piece into 4 separate bits. One I've used to make a folded card base. So this is my card. I've added some white cardstock over the front there just to give it a bit more strength. I've cut another piece to card front size. I'm using the Versa Magic Sahara Sand ink pad just to add some pattern to this. Now the Sahara Sand is quite similar to the Cafe au Lait colour, so it's not going to really take over at all, it's just going to add a little pattern. Now it's a little scruffy, I kind of like that. This whole Christmas project is going to be a little distressed. Now another piece I have cut into a strip size. This strip is going to be long enough to fit on one side of my card to create a panel, just to add a little bit more interest. Another one of these little strips, and this is from the watercolor paper, I'm going to tear into a wedge shape. Now I'm actually tearing so that the paper is pulled towards me, and this will expose a white edge on the surface. If you didn't want a white edge, you could either flip the cardstock over and tear it from the back, or tear it in the opposite direction. But I like having that little bit of white showing through. It just helps separate one layer from the next. Something a little bit different. So tear carefully. This will fit across the front of the card. Now you may have noticed I'm actually mounting each of my panels and pieces of card onto a piece of white card before putting it all together. This just means that because they're all such similar colours, there's something there to separate them. It makes each of those shapes more distinct and more defined. Gives the card a little bit more zhuzh. On that hand-torn strip that I've just created, I'm going to use the Red Geranium archival ink pad. I'm going to stamp with the same Judikins stamp that I've already used, just so it's not too fussy and too busy with too many different images. I'm just going to ink up the stamp and whack it on there. Now, because the Cafe au lait has a little bit of sort of chalkiness to it, the red won't be quite as vibrant as it would be if it were on plain white cardstock, but that's okay, it's still going to look gorgeous. Now, for that long panel that's going to sit down one side of my card front, I'm using Golden Glitz Delicata ink. Now, this against that chalky colour will be gorgeous, and I'm hoping it's going to pick out some of those gold elements that are going to be in my red flower. So all I'm doing is randomly stamping a little Merry Christmas stamp, this one's from Hero Arts, just across the background. Now obviously it won't be big enough for you to read the entire words Merry Christmas, but I'm hoping that because there's so many of these stamped, you kind of get the idea. I love the fact that this is sort of a subtle kind of an ink. It doesn't really come out there and punch you in the face. As you tilt it, you get this beautiful subtle shimmer, and on the Lindy Stamp Gang products, that's amazing. They go together so well because it's not overpowering. It really lets those Lindy's colours shine through. Now that I have all of my individual panels created, I'm going to use my little Tim Holtz distressing tool just to scruff up the edges of everything. As I said before, I want this to be a distressed card, so it needs a little bit of scruffiness to it all. Now that all of those base layers are complete, it's time to put together the central element for this card. So I'm using some Sizzix dies, and this is just a small poinsettia die, and that beautiful red cardstock I coloured. I've cut a whole batch of little petal elements, and I've just used one of those little tiny ball tools to give a little bit of a shape to each of these petals. I'm going to use some glossy accents quite sparingly and just layer each of these one on top of the other, making sure that the petals sort of stand up as I'm going, so it creates a really three-dimensional looking flower. Now for the final element on this, I'm going to add some faux snow. To do that, I'm adding glossy accents just to the very tips of each of those petals. I'm adding purely white embossing powder from Lindy's Stamp Gang while it's still wet. And instead of letting it dry naturally, I'm hitting it with an embossing gun or embossing heat tool. This makes the glue puff up as the embossing powder is drying, and you get a really interesting effect that looks a lot like snow. I've added a tiny little bit of stickles to this, just for a little bit of shimmer. And I've finished my card by layering all of those elements together and adding a little bit of twine, a little bit of crystal bling, and some of those little tiny coily vine things behind the flower, and of course a little pearl in the middle. I've made sure the flower is sitting up off the card a little bit, just so it looks a bit more 3D, and as you can see, the tan and the red look fantastic together, and it just worked so well as a Christmas card. You could, of course, change the flower on this. You could use roses or daisies or anything you like, and instead of a Christmas card, you'd have an amazing birthday card, anniversary card, thank you card. It's quite a versatile pattern. So I hope you've enjoyed watching this. I enjoyed creating it for you. Bye!